$150 million. That is the single bribe figure prosecutors attached to just one corner of one scheme inside one organization. And that organization ran the most watched sporting event on earth. FIFA collected billions in television rights, sponsorship fees, and hosting payments, all while its own officials were allegedly routing cash through shell accounts in Miami, Zurich, and the Cayman Islands. The men who sold the beautiful game were selling it, literally. How does the governing body of a sport played by 265 million people become, in the words of a United States federal indictment, a criminal enterprise? That question broke open in a Zurich hotel at dawn on the 27th of May 2015, and the answer had been building for decades. To understand how FIFA became what it became, you have to understand what it was selling, not football, television. Beginning in the 1980s, the value of broadcasting rights to the FIFA World Cup began to climb at a rate that outpaced almost every other media property on the planet. By the time the 1994 tournament was held in the United States, rights fees were measured in hundreds of millions of dollars. By 2010, they were measured in billions. FIFA sat at the center of that cash flow, and the men who controlled FIFA controlled who received it. The organization had been founded in Paris in 1904 as a modest administrative body for international football. For most of its first 70 years, it operated on a shoestring. That changed with João Havelange, who took the presidency in 1974 on a platform of expanding the World Cup and bringing television money to bear on the sport globally. Havelange understood, earlier than almost anyone in sport, that football was not a game. It was a broadcast product. And broadcast products could be monetized in ways that a gentleman's sporting federation had never imagined. Under Havelange, FIFA's commercial apparatus was rebuilt around a Swiss marketing company called ISL, International Sport and Leisure. ISL secured the rights to sell FIFA's television and marketing packages to broadcasters and sponsors worldwide. The arrangement generated enormous revenues. It also, according to Swiss court findings published in 2010, generated enormous bribes. Swiss prosecutors concluded that ISL paid approximately 138 million Swiss francs in corrupt payments to sports officials over the course of its relationship with FIFA. Havelange himself and his son-in-law Ricardo Teixeira were named in those Swiss proceedings as recipients of payments. Havelange resigned from the FIFA Ethics Committee in 2013 before a formal hearing could conclude. Sepp Blatter succeeded Havelange as FIFA president in 1998. Blatter had been FIFA's general secretary since 1981 and had spent nearly 2 decades learning the internal architecture of the organization, who voted, who needed what, and how decisions were actually made. His election was itself contested. The Caribbean Football Union's Jack Warner, who would later become one of the central figures in the United States indictment, was a significant organizer of votes for Blatter in that election cycle. Under Blatter, FIFA's revenues grew dramatically. The 2002 World Cup in Korea and Japan generated FIFA revenues of approximately $817 million. By 2014 in Brazil, that figure had reached $4.8 billion over the 4-year cycle. If figure had reached 4. It was a multi-billion-dollar enterprise with the governance structure of a 19th-century gentleman's club. No external shareholders, minimal independent oversight, and an executive committee that voted on the most consequential financial decisions in world sport behind closed doors. The money attracted people who understood how to extract value from institutions with weak oversight. And for decades, the extraction was systematic. The first serious public fracture came not from a regulator, but from a failed business deal. In 2001, SL FIFA's long-time commercial partner collapsed into insolvency. The bankruptcy proceedings in Switzerland opened the books. And what the Swiss courts found over the following decade was damaging in the extreme. The court documents, finalized in 2010, detailed a pattern of payments to sports officials that Swiss prosecutors characterized as bribes. The total figure, approximately 138 million Swiss francs, paid out over the course of ISL's relationship with FIFA and other sports bodies. These were not consulting fees with legitimate contracts behind them. They were cash and wire transfers routed through intermediaries to officials who held voting power over the very contracts ISL was trying to win. Here is what no one saw coming. FIFA's own response to the ISL findings was to pay a settlement that effectively closed the Swiss criminal proceedings against named officials, without those officials facing a public trial. The payment was confirmed by Swiss court records. The names of the recipients remained sealed for years. When they were finally published, Havelange and Teixeira were among them. FIFA had, in practical terms, used its own institutional funds to shield its own former president from criminal prosecution. That fact alone tells you something about the internal culture. But the ISL collapse was only one thread. Across the Atlantic, a parallel structure had been operating for years. The CONCACAF region, covering North America, Central America, and the Caribbean, had become, according to the United States Department of Justice indictment filed in 2015, a reliable engine of corrupt payments around commercial rights deals. Jack Warner, who served as CONCACAF president from 1990 to 2011, was named in the indictment as a central figure. Chuck Blazer, the American who served as CONCACAF General Secretary, pleaded guilty in 2013 to racketeering, wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. Blazer's cooperation with the FBI would prove to be the thread that unraveled the entire network. Blazer had been recruited as an FBI informant in 2011, according to court filings. For approximately 2 years, he wore a recording device to FIFA events. He attended executive committee meetings. He sat in hotel lobbies. He had conversations with people who trusted him. The recordings and financial records he provided gave the Department of Justice's investigation a level of documented detail that no external audit had ever produced. Meanwhile, the 2010 vote to award the 2018 and 2022 World Cups to Russia and Qatar respectively generated immediate controversy. The Sunday Times of London published an investigation in 2010 alleging vote buying around the Qatar bid. FIFA's own internal investigation, conducted by American lawyer Michael Garcia, produced a report that FIFA's appeals committee then summarized in a way Garcia publicly stated misrepresented his findings. Garcia resigned in protest. The full Garcia report was eventually published in 2017 after litigation. It documented extensive undisclosed conflicts of interest and irregular payments in the bidding process, though Garcia's own conclusions on whether the vote itself was corrupt were more qualified than the public controversy suggested. By 2014, the United States Department of Justice had been building its case for 3 years. The grand jury in the Eastern District of New York had heard testimony. Bank records had been subpoenaed. The wire transfers that routed bribe payments through American correspondent banks gave the DOJ its jurisdictional hook. Under United States law, any wire transfer that passes through an American bank, even briefly, even as part of an international transaction, falls within American federal jurisdiction. FIFA officials had been routing payments through New York for years without understanding, or perhaps without caring, what that meant legally. The morning of May 27, 2015, was supposed to be an ordinary day at the Bauerlac Hotel in Zurich. FIFA's Congress was convening. Sepp Blatter was expected to win re-election as president. Instead, Swiss federal police arrived at 6:45 in the morning and arrested 7 FIFA officials in their hotel rooms. The arrests were coordinated with the United States Department of Justice, which simultaneously unsealed a 47-count indictment in Brooklyn, New York. The indictment named 14 individuals and charged them with racketeering, wire fraud conspiracy, and money laundering conspiracy. The defendants included current and former FIFA vice presidents, CONCACAF officials, and sports marketing executives. The DOJ alleged that the corrupt scheme had operated for more than 24 years, involving wire payments totaling well over $150 million in bribes and kickbacks. The payments were tied specifically to the sale of commercial rights, television rights, marketing rights, sponsorship rights, for tournaments including the Copa America, the CONCACAF Gold Cup, and World Cup qualifying matches in the Americas. Blatter was not named in that first indictment. He won his re-election vote 4 days later, on June 2nd. Then, 4 days after that, he resigned. His statement cited a loss of confidence among some members of the FIFA family. Swiss authorities subsequently opened a criminal investigation into Blatter personally, related to a 2 million Swiss franc payment made to UEFA President Michel Platini in 2011. Blatter denied wrongdoing. FIFA's ethics committee banned him from all football-related activities for 8 years, later reduced to 6 years on appeal. The Court of Arbitration for Sport upheld a 6-year ban. Swiss prosecutors investigated the payment for years. In 2021, Blatter was charged with fraud. In 2023, a Swiss court acquitted him of the fraud charge, finding the payment had a legitimate contractual basis, though the acquittal was appealed by prosecutors. Now here is the scale of what the prosecutions ultimately produced. By 2020, the United States Department of Justice had secured guilty pleas or convictions from more than 30 individuals and entities. The list included former CONCACAF president Jeffrey Webb, who pleaded guilty to racketeering and money laundering. Former CONMEBOL officials pleaded guilty to receiving millions in bribes for South American tournament rights. Sports marketing companies pleaded guilty and agreed to forfeitures totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. Traffic Sports, a Brazilian marketing company, pleaded guilty and agreed to pay a fine of $172 million, one of the largest criminal fines in sports business history. A second superseding indictment in 2015 added more defendants. A third wave of charges followed in 2017, naming additional CONMEBOL officials and adding charges related to the 2018 and 2018 and 2022 World Cup bidding processes. The DOJ's total accounting of corrupt payments across all the prosecutions exceeded $200 million in documented bribes and kickbacks. That figure covers only what prosecutors could prove in court. The actual total across the full span of the scheme is almost certainly higher. The Swiss authorities conducted their own parallel investigation. The Swiss Office of the Attorney General opened proceedings related to the World Cup votes and the ISL payments. Those proceedings moved more slowly than the American prosecutions, but added additional layers of documented scrutiny to FIFA's financial history. FIFA itself commissioned. The organization hired American attorney Maria Eugenia Bartolome Najera and later worked with governance consultants to restructure its ethics and compliance systems. A new FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, was elected in February 2016 on a reform platform. Infantino subsequently became the subject of his own Swiss criminal investigation related to undisclosed meetings with the Swiss Attorney General, though FIFA maintained he retained its full competence throughout. What remained after the indictments, the guilty pleas, and the resignations was an institution that had survived. FIFA continued to operate. The 2018 World Cup in Russia proceeded. The 2022 World Cup in Qatar proceeded. Television rights fees continued to rise. Sponsors who had threatened to withdraw largely remained. The commercial engine kept running. The financial penalties were significant. Traffic Sports paid $172 million. Tottenham Hotspur's former shirt sponsor, the sports marketing firm Full Play Group, was implicated in the indictments. Forfeitures ordered across the cases totaled hundreds of millions of dollars, much of it directed to FIFA itself as the nominally aggrieved party, a detail that struck many observers as structurally odd given that FIFA's own officials had been the perpetrators. The governance reforms FIFA adopted after 2015 were substantive in some respects. Presidential term limits were introduced. An independent audit and compliance committee was established with external members. Financial disclosures for senior officials were expanded. The ethics committee was restructured with an investigatory chamber and an adjudicatory chamber separated from each other. Whether those reforms addressed the underlying incentive structure, the concentration of enormous commercial value in the hands of officials with minimal external accountability, is a question governance scholars continue to debate. For the victims. And there were victims, though they are rarely the focus of the narrative. The picture was complicated. The national football associations of smaller countries, particularly in the Caribbean and Africa, had for years received FIFA development funds that were partly contingent on political loyalty to the incumbent leadership. Some of those funds were legitimate. Some were used as instruments of political control. Disentangling the two was difficult, and the DOJ prosecutions did not fully resolve it. The players and fans who loved the sport had no voice in any of this. The 265 million people who played football worldwide, the billions who watched it, had no mechanism to hold FIFA accountable. FIFA was not publicly traded. It had no external shareholders who could vote out management. It was accountable, formally, only to its 211 member associations, many of which were themselves governed by the same officials who benefited from the system. Chuck Blazer, the cooperating witness whose recordings helped build the DOJ case, died in 2017 before he was sentenced. Jack Warner was indicted but fought extradition from Trinidad and Tobago. As of the time of this episode, extradition proceedings were ongoing. Jeffrey Webb, who had been presented as a reform candidate when he succeeded Warner at CONCACAF, pleaded guilty and cooperated with prosecutors. The lesson the record supports is straightforward, and it does not record supports is straightforward. When an institution controls access to something worth billions of dollars, broadcast rights, hosting rights, commercial licenses, and operates without independent external oversight, without public shareholders, and without meaningful accountability to the people the institution nominally serves, the institution will attract people who intend to extract that value for themselves. The structure creates the incentive. The incentive produces the behavior. FIFA was not an anomaly in global sport. It was the most documented example of a pattern that governance researchers had been describing for decades. The documentation, when it finally came not from FIFA's own auditors, not from its ethics committee, and not from its member associations. It came from a federal grand jury in Brooklyn, New York, and from a man wearing a wire at a hotel lobby in Miami.